Peggy Grande, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And we are here at the CPAC conference and happy to run into you. Ronald Reagan, as all people know, is the only president who actually was born and raised in Illinois, and he was often said to be proud of his Illinois roots as he went up and moved out to LA and had the career that we're familiar with, both in Hollywood and then in politics. Tell us, you had a very unique role in his life, and what was it and how did that happen?
I did. I feel like I'm one of the luckiest women in the world. I had the opportunity of a lifetime to work for President Ronald Reagan, to serve him as his executive assistant for 10 years in his post-presidency. So in 1989, when he left the White House, he came back to LA and set up a post-presidency office. I was a communications major in college at the time, and the great communicator had just left the White House, and he was the perfect convergence of everything I loved. I was always that nerdy little kid that loved, presidents and politics and government, and so here he was in my backyard. I took a chance, I wrote a letter to the office, was brought in for an interview and hired basically on the spot for what I thought would be a short-term internship while I graduated. Following the end of that graduation, I was hired to work as the executive assistant to the chief of staff, served in that capacity for a few years, and then Ronald Reagan's longtime executive assistant he had since before he was governor retired, and they asked me to take that job. You don't say no to that.
So what years did you work for him?
So I served him from 1989 when he left office until 1999 when he left the public eye. And as you probably know, he lived actually for another 5 years after that. So served him directly 10 of his final 15 years of his life.
What was he like as a man?
Terrific. Probably everything you thought and hoped that he was that, and maybe even a little bit better. He's one of those rare individuals that regardless of the pedestal you put him on, however much you admired him, when you met him in person, he was even more charming, more kind, more handsome, and just a wonderful person to work with.
Did he talk in that period of time? Did he discuss public policy and what was going on in the world? Because we really didn't hear too much from him as far as speaking on issues. Of course, a lot of presidents don't speak. I mean, as a courtesy to who's ever president. Then. But what kind of things did he? I mean, we can maybe guess, but what kind of things did he take an opinion about?
Yeah, he was very mindful of the fact that when you're not in the Oval Office, you don't have all the information that the sitting president has, and so he was very careful not to backseat judge or backseat drive the presidency. That being said, he had a couple of pet issues that he continued to speak out on. He believed that the whole idea of gerrymandering was very much against the will of the people to live and vote in blocks of people. He also thought that the line item veto was something that at the time 20-something governors had, and it wasn't something the president of the United States had, and just thought that that would be a great budget balancing tool. And he also spoke out against the 22nd Amendment, limiting the presidential term to 2 limits. I don't think he wanted to run for a 3rd limit, but again, he always trusted we the people to make the best choice and thought that maybe in a way that limited our choice as people.
You know, it's interesting because the only time since World War II when a party held the White House for 3 successive elections was Reagan-Bush, and many people viewed George Bush's 41 election as a 3rd term for Reagan to continue on those policies. How did he ever discuss President Bush, who was his successor, and was he generally supportive of him, or was he disappointed about certain things?
Well, he never jumped in to criticize or make comment unless it was solicited. And so, you know, George Bush would reach out to Ronald Reagan often. They talked often on the phone. President Bush came by the office several times during the post-presidency to visit with President Reagan. And so they had a great affinity for each other. When you would see them together, you would see how they would light up with great affection and friendship. And so that was an important relationship for him to be continued ongoing. But Ronald Reagan was very careful, especially since he had been his vice president, not to backseat drive the Bush presidency.
Of course, he also, you were with him through some of the Clinton years. Did he comment much on the Clinton presidency with you?
No, he was very respectful of the office of the presidency itself. And so, you know, he had great respect for the office of the presidency. It wasn't tied to partisanship. He knew that it was bigger than him or bigger than any person that served in that office. And so he was generally fairly quiet on his own personal policy opinions, but professionally, very personally supportive of everybody who held that office.
He was a great joker and a great storyteller.
He was.
Did he regale you with stories of a Hollywood or just other things as you were working with him?
He was more likely to tell stories about Hollywood than he was about his presidency, so which was always interesting. Those were really wonderful years for him. He loved those early years in California, raising his family and having so many great friends in Hollywood, and so he loved to talk about those days. He, of course, also loved to talk about his ranch and riding horses and all the things that maybe would surprise you rather than sitting and reminiscing about policy decisions in the 80s.
If someone wants to get your book, first of all, what is it historical? How would you describe your book? Is it showing us the personal side of Ronald Reagan, or just what does it cover?
Yeah, so it's a memoir, so it's my story of Ronald Reagan and what I saw and witnessed and exhibited those 10 years that I served him and on until the end of his life. And so it's not a policy book, it's not a political book, it's very much a character sketch of a man. It's also the story of an ordinary girl who wound up at the feet of greatness and got the opportunity to serve an extraordinary man. And what an incredible only in America story. Just like Ronald Reagan's, a boy born in the middle of a wide spot in the middle of Illinois to a poor family in the midst of the Great Depression. As you know, his father was an alcoholic, and you looked at the cards of his life and thought, nothing will come of this, nothing good could happen, and yet Ronald Reagan defied the odds and proved that really in America anything is possible.
Did he, last question, were there any tales, or how did he look at his life in Illinois? Did he share that with you growing up, or?
Oh, he loved it. He loved talking about, he was proud of being born in Tampico. All the years he spent in Dixon, I think, were some of the most fond memories that he had. He loved talking about Eureka College, and so over the course of the past several years, I've gotten to be in central Illinois many, many times, and it's wonderful to picture him there and to really imagine all the things that small-town America invested into him and how he became such a great steward of that and took those small-town values of community and faith and patriotism and really got to exalt them not only on the national stage but globally.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, and if someone wants to get your book, where can they find it?
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any independent bookstore. It's available in hardback, audiobook, which I read for myself, ebook, and the paperback just came out on President Reagan's birthday a week or so ago, February 6th.
Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much.